everyone, and welcome back to Zooming Through Summer. Today we are talking with Megan, who is a pharmacist. Before we get started, I would just like to let everyone know that if you have any questions while we go through this, please type them in the public chat and we can answer them during the Q&A portion of this conversation. And I'll just give you guys a quick outline. So in the beginning, we will have an undergrad / grad journey Q&A. And then there's a section where you guys can ask questions, like she'll talk about her current life and work experience as well. And then after that, we will have a case study type section where she will discuss what specifics of what she does, so we can have a shadowing experience for you guys. All right, so let's get started. Can you introduce yourself, Megan, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with all of you and share a little bit about my experience. So my name is Megan Larison. I am a recent PharmD graduate from the University of Kentucky College of Pharmacy. So during undergrad and through pharmacy school, I had experience working in retail pharmacy. But during my fourth year, I had a variety of rotations, starting with industry, which is kind of my niche. I had a rotation at Bristol Myers Squibb, and I did a rotation at Procter & Gamble in consumer health, as well as an outpatient oncology clinic, and then to managed care as well. So I got a variety of experiences during pharmacy school, which now led me to completing my postdoctoral pharmaceutical industry fellowship through the Rutgers program. It's a 2-year program that will provide me with more extensive experience and training opportunities to kind of set me up for the rest of my career.
All right. So can you start us off by telling us a little bit about your undergrad journey and how it all led you to become a pharmacist?
Yeah, absolutely. So reflecting back on this question, honestly, I think I knew I wanted to be a pharmacist back to high school. I knew I always wanted to go into the medical field, but I didn't want to do something necessarily hands-on with patients. So I felt like pharmacy was kind of the perfect niche because you're still interacting with patients, but you're not as much hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
A lot about the drugs and stuff. So in undergrad, I got a job as a pharmacy technician at a Rite Aid, and kind of worked there for a couple years and really liked it. So I said, I think I'm going to apply to pharmacy school. So I did the 3 years of undergrad at UK as well. So you can do pre-pharmacy classes and you don't have to graduate with a degree for pharmacy school. So it's kind of unique in that aspect. You can kind of get through a graduate program a little bit quicker than some other programs. So having that retail experience, I think, really helped set me up for knowing that pharmacy was the right career for me. So I recommend to anyone, if you're interested in pharmacy or even nursing, medical school, definitely get a job as a pharmacy tech. It'll provide so much benefit to you. In undergrad as well, what kind of led me to industry was I was in a pharmacology class that brought in guest speakers, kind of like this club does, and introduces you to different areas of pharmacy. And we had a speaker come from industry and talked about the different roles that pharmacists can play in industry. And that was something I had no idea existed. And after hearing that, I was just like, that sounds like a dream job to me. How do I do this? So once I got in pharmacy school, that's how I got more involved with industry and stuff. Sorry, that was kind of long.
No, that's great. So that just can go to show that you might not know what you're going to go into until graduate school, which is pretty neat. So going back to undergrad a little bit, can you tell us about any extracurriculars that you got involved with in that college and what the most important steps that a student should take while they're in undergrad to become a pharmacist are?
Yes, great question. So highly recommend just getting involved in undergrad. So for my experience, I was in an organization called the Student Wellness Ambassadors, and it was a campus-wide organization that kind of just promoted against mental health, like the stigma of mental health, and provided resources to students who maybe struggled with depression, anxiety, anything from those means. And so that was just like a cool club to be involved in. As well, there was a pre-pharmacy club I was involved in that kind of helped just guide you through the application process and how to better prepare for pharmacy school. And as well as I was in a sorority in undergrad at UK as well. And I think that provided a lot of opportunities for leadership and volunteer experience. So I think just having as many experiences to show your diversity and that you're very well rounded and that you can work with people. So I'd recommend just getting involved with as much as you can handle. I wouldn't like overdo it, but just to show that you can have like a diversity among like the experiences leading up to pharmacy school or any like medical or PA school is so important.
So you don't necessarily have to be just involved in pharmacy clubs and just pharmacy-based stuff. It's like good to branch out and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would highly recommend just anything. I mean, a lot of skills can be transferable to pharmacy. So even like in my sorority, for example, I took on a leadership role and led like our volunteer team, and just showing that you can lead a group of people is so important. So just showing that you can adapt to many different groups, you have other interests outside of just pharmacy, I think is important too.
Mm-hmm. So were there any jobs that you did in a clinical setting during undergrad, such as like a pharmacy technician or anything along those lines?
Yes. So I got my job at Rite Aid as a pharmacy tech during undergrad. And then once I got into pharmacy school, your like title changes to an intern, which allows you to do more counseling, like patient counseling, immunizations, things like that. So I had that clinical experience all through pharmacy school. And I would highly recommend, whether you're in pharmacy school, PA school, dental school, whatever, trying to work. I mean, I didn't work many hours because it is a very like rigorous program. You have to study a lot, but it really supplements, I think, what you're learning in the classroom. You're able to take it back to your job and like apply it in real life. So I would recommend like anyone, if you can get a job at least like for a few hours a week, being able to do that. In pharmacy school, they also had introductory to professional pharmacy practice experiences. So these were 4-week rotations in a hospital setting that I had after my first and second year of pharmacy school in the summer. So that was a little bit more kind of short-term clinical experience too.
So do you have any like specific advice that you could give to get a job like that one? Because I would imagine it's like competitive too.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I felt like I kind of lucked out. Like I was just in a pharmacy one day and like said I was going into pharmacy school and wanted the experience. So I think being transparent when you're applying for jobs goes kind of far. I think saying like you're actually very interested in the medical field and having like that passion for it will show through rather than just like applying for a job to have a job. So I would just recommend being transparent, as well as using those experiences that you get involved with in undergrad, like putting those on your resume. So then it'll show like, oh, you have leadership, you're reliable, you're a part of things. So I think that would help get your job as well.
So along with the extracurriculars and jobs, what else would you suggest you could put on your application? Like what did the process look like for you in order to get accepted into pharmacy school?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most schools, like it depends on their website, they'll have like what's required for the application. But I would say usually it's like a letter of intent. So you have to write kind of an essay, like why you're applying to pharmacy school, what kind of led you here, and what you have to offer to the program as well. I think that's so important. It's more not only like them, like letting you in, but making sure it's a good fit for you as well. So a letter of intent, and then your grades from undergrad are important. I would say probably when it comes down to the application process and the grades, Honestly, I think it stands out more to have a student that has like a 3.5 GPA, but has a lot of involvement in leadership and like real life experiences versus just a student that has a 4.0 and like all they do is study and have like perfect grades, which that's great. But if you don't have like real life experiences, like a job or organization or leadership experiences, I think that goes a lot further like applying when you're applying to pharmacy in school. So I would like highly recommend that. Like grades aren't everything. Trust me, like I wasn't 4.0 all the way through. I mean, I made good grades and like had honors and stuff, but like I wasn't a 4.0 student. So you can do it like without a 4.0 for sure.
So in terms of major, would you say that you'd have to have a science major, like a biology or a physics, or do you think it's okay to go into a non-traditional route?
Yeah, so I actually majored in human nutrition. So it's still kind of science, but it's not like straight chemistry. Like nutrition is something I'm very interested in. So I think that's kind of like, oh, it's something you're interested in, but not necessarily pharmacy. For me, the pre-pharmacy was just like required classes. So you had to take like your introduction to like general chemistry, your biology, your organic chemistry. So those are required, but you can major in other like areas and get that like experience that's not required, if that kind of makes sense, like using those as elective courses. So I don't think you necessarily have to major in like biology or chemistry, especially if you're not finishing like the degree. Then just take other classes that you enjoy taking.
That makes sense. So, were there any exams like the PCAT that you had to take in order to apply for pharmacy school? And if you did, how do you recommend studying for that?
Oh yes, so the lovely PCAT. Yes, I had to take that awful exam. Um, so I think I got the prep book or like the whole package. So it was like a book and then note cards and had like online videos and courses that kind of helped you go through and like know what to study. I think that would be very beneficial. The PCAT actually has changed the format since I've taken it. Like I feel so old now. Like I think that was 5 or 6 years ago, but it's changed some, so I can't give specific advice to the exam, but I would recommend just getting a prep book and doing like the online videos. And then the big thing is taking a practice exam. So actually sitting down and doing like a full practice exam, which I know sucks, especially if you're sitting at home and you can get distracted easy, but really trying to kind of do like a mock setting of what the test would actually be like. So going through for almost like 5 hours or however long you get for the PCAT and really trying to simulate that same experience you would be having, I think would be very helpful.
Okay. So, do you know if the PCAT is always required in order to apply for pharmacy school?
So that's actually something very new that just changed, I think, this past year. So it's not required for all pharmacy schools anymore, which my school, the University of Kentucky, does not require it anymore as well. I think this can be a good thing. So they did a study and it showed that students' PCAT score did not necessarily correlate with how their actual performance was in pharmacy school. I feel like I can even kind of vouch for that because I personally had to take the PCAT twice. Like my first time, I really did not do that well. Like I needed to learn how to study differently. So after I took it the second time, like increased my score significantly, got an interview like immediately from my raw score. So I think it just goes to show you, like I still did well in pharmacy school and the score necessarily does not correlate with how you're going to do in school. And I know also the PCAT can be very expensive and the materials and the courses to prep for it. So I think at least the aspect of it not being a financial barrier for students who want to get into pharmacy school, if they can't afford to take the exam and apply and have all the courses. So I think it allows like more people to have access to getting into pharmacy school. I know there's a couple other university like schools that aren't requiring it as well. It just depends on the program, but it's kind of like there's pros and cons to it for sure.
Mm-hmm. So, do you know if there's any schools that don't require like a full bachelor's degree either? Because I was reading up on that and there's some schools that don't. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so that's kind of what my path was. I don't have an undergrad degree. I just did 3 years of like pre-pharmacy classes. So they'll have courses like you just have to take the prerequisites to get into pharmacy school and not have that degree. So it kind of makes it like a more accelerated program and you can get kind of done with school a little bit quicker. So I think that's like the neat, unique aspect to pharmacy because if you wanted to, you could get it done in 6 or 7 years with some schools.
Mm-hmm. So overall, what would you say the best thing a student could do in college to stand out on the application process in terms of personal statements and stuff like that? Just how do I stand out on my application?
Yeah. So, kind of going back to the extracurricular activities, I think just showing that you have a variety of involvement, a variety of experiences, whether those are good or bad life experiences. I mean, we grow so much from our failures, but just showing you are diverse overall as a student. I think that really like stands out on a resume as well. Once you actually get to the interviews, I think having strong communication skills is like so important, especially going into the medical field. You have to communicate with patients, other healthcare providers, and showing that you can do that already, like at an early start, will really help you stand out. Once you get to those interviews, it's not as much like about what you know. You don't have to know everything. Like you're going to pharmacy school to learn. If you knew everything, you wouldn't have to go. So they understand that you don't know all the answers. So it's more just how you think about solving problems and how well you can work with other people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So moving out of undergrad to grad school, how did that differ for you from undergrad to grad school? Like how much of a learning curve? What were some major differences you noticed? How should a student prepare for that?
Oh yeah, so pharmacy school was like definitely a lot more time consuming. I would say learning like self discipline is a big thing, like learning when to say yes or no to certain things. Like time management skills are huge because you're going to have to go to class pretty much 8 to 5 all week and then just staying on top of your notes and studying. So it's kind of a learning process, and what works for you doesn't always work for another person, but just trying to stay up on all your classes and your notes, and just try to stay ahead, because once you get behind on like the learning, it's going to be a lot more material that you have to make up like kind of later on. So just basically time management's the biggest, like I think, learning curve from undergrad to graduate school.
Mhm. So moving on to your current life and work experience, like I know you told me that you're a non-traditional pharmacist. So could you tell me what your current job as a pharmacist looks like and what a typical day of work consists of?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm doing a fellowship, and my title is an Oncology Global Medical Affairs Fellow, and I'm doing that through the Rutgers program at a pharmaceutical company. And so in industry, you don't necessarily have a typical day, and this is what really like appealed industry to me. So I don't like doing the same thing over and over and having the same like schedule day in and day out. And industry really provides you a different experience every day. It's a very stimulating environment. So, right now, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, I am working at home. So, it's a little bit different than I had imagined, because typically I would go into an office setting, and I would have meetings with people. So, now working from home, I do still have all the meetings, and I'm kind of like making my own schedule, but some days may be filled with meetings from like 8 to 4, whereas other days I may only have 1 or 2 meetings, maybe no meetings at all. But those days are filled with usually working on projects that are more ongoing basis, supporting whatever team or area that I'm working on, like in oncology right now. So it kind of varies. It's hard to say.
So what drew you to this path as opposed to a traditional pharmacist who would work in a hospital or any other setting?
Yeah. So when I heard that one guest speaker in undergrad, it just really appealed to me because you had a different kind of day in and day out is like completely different. You're in a stimulating environment and there's a lot of room for growth and development on a career level. And I think you can also make you're not necessarily seeing patients face to face every day, but knowing if you're working on a medication that can be like life-saving to a patient, knowing that you can have that global impact on a lot more people and touching them, and especially oncology, like there's not a cure for cancer right now. So that's why I wanted to go into oncology, because I felt like it would be a lot more rewarding path to know that I could potentially be working on a drug that could save someone's life or extend their life by 5 or 6 years. So I think just knowing what fit my personality, and I really like industry really values the work-life balance. Like I don't work any holidays or weekends. It's just a typical kind of Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 type job. So family is really important to me. And so you kind of get the opportunity to still have your weekends and holidays off.
So, I'm looking at some of these questions and they're like relevant to the conversation we're having right now. So, for a student, what would you tell them? How would they know if pharmacy is the right fit for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would just do like a lot of self-reflecting. Like, one, do you like science? So you're going to have to take a lot of like chemistry, biology classes, which those are not always like direct reflecting on what pharmacy is, because I don't use anything I learned in organic chemistry. But it's like basically, can you get through it to get to pharmacy? So then I would say next is, do you like learning about disease states and about how the body works? Do you like being like very detail oriented? So a lot of stuff that pharmacist does is being very detail oriented. You have to catch drug interactions, know about side effects. So I think if those are things that just appeal to you in general, then reaching out and doing things like this, like talking to people that are in pharmacy, so in hospital, in retail, in industry, like talk to them about their experiences and like their day-to-day life, as well as even trying to shadow them. I know during the pandemic it's hard, but just even if you could get a job at like a pharmacy, that would be helpful too.
Mm-hmm. So, a student who might be considering pharmacy, should they be worried about job outlook or job growth rate once they graduate? How do they know there's a job waiting for them?
That's a great question. So a few years ago, there was actually like a huge need. Well, I think it was more than a few years ago, probably like 10 or plus years. There was a huge need for pharmacists. So a lot of pharmacy schools started popping up because they needed pharmacists. So that definitely has now kind of turned the opposite way. So it is like people are now worried about maybe there's too many schools popping up for pharmacists. But I think if you find the right path, there is definitely like they're always going to need pharmacists. I would say retail is one area that it may be getting a little saturated. With that being said, there's still so many other areas, like you can go into independent pharmacy, specialty pharmacy, like there's just so many areas. And once you get into one area, you're not stuck there for life. Like you could always go to hospital pharmacy or something else. So I think just finding what's like the right fit for you, there's definitely, I would say, plenty of job opportunities out there for you.
Mm-hmm. So, talking back to specialties, how did you decide between fellowship and residency, and how is that process? How does it take place?
Yeah. So the way I like to compare fellowship and residency is they're both extensive training, you anywhere from like 3 to 5 years of experience condensed into 1 or 2 years. So you're bringing extensive experience, but residency is the clinical side. So that's taking place in a hospital setting, whereas a fellowship is the industry side. So you are in a non patient setting. So you'd be more in like an office setting. And the process for applying to them both happens at mid-year. I can't talk as much about the residency experience since I haven't applied for a residency, so I know it's a little bit different. But with fellowship, you apply to programs and you have lots of interviews, usually 3 to 4 rounds of interviews for a fellowship, and then you would go on site at a company and give a presentation and have more interviews there. So it's like really heavy in the interview process.
So a lot of people are also asking, is your job similar to that one of a research person, I guess you would say? Like, is that what you're doing right now, is mostly research?
So I kind of touch on that a little bit in the presentation I'm going to give, but so I work specifically in medical affairs. So there's like so many functional areas within industry, and like research and development is one of them, but I'm specifically in medical affairs. So I work more on checking like the accuracy of materials. So I review materials that sales reps might be using in the field. I answer questions from doctors, any people that are doing clinical trials. So it's more you're checking for like medical accuracy as well as like creating different materials to educate doctors on as well.
So just wrapping up this section, if you were a freshman in undergrad, would you pick this journey again?
Yes, absolutely. I'm living like my dream career path right now for sure. I mean, it's a little bit different given the pandemic. I didn't expect to be working from home. I thought I'd be in an office and moved to a different city, but I know I'll end up there eventually. So it's definitely very rewarding and what I wanted to go into.
All right. So now we can begin your more detailed presentation on what you do currently, and I will screen share so I can pull up your presentation. Can you see it?
Not yet.
There. I'll pull it up. All right.
Perfect.
Is it all good?
Yes, good. Okay, so this is just really short and sweet, just a few slides to give you more of a visual. And I'm no expert on clinical trials, but I think it's really important to just get a good overview of clinical trials, whether you're going to be a pharmacist, a physician, a PA, a nurse, because there's roles for all healthcare providers working on clinical trials. So I think it could be very beneficial to anyone like in the healthcare field. So first, just starting with the definition of clinical trials, which are research studies performed in people that are aimed at evaluating a medical, surgical, or behavioral intervention. They are the primary way that researchers find out if a new medical treatment, like a drug, diet, or medical device is safe and effective in people.
Mm-hmm.
So next, this is just a visual to kind of show you the overall process of drug development. So understanding that first is the preclinical phase. So this is when a drug is tested in animals, which can range from 1 to 3 years. And then once they find that it's safe for animals, they submit an investigational new drug application, and the FDA will approve this for safety review, which allows it to go into the clinical trials phases, which consist of 3 phases. And that can range from 2 to 10 years, which is like crazy to me because right now they're working on the vaccine for the coronavirus and they're doing like an accelerated approval process. So this is not applicable to that. And then after phase 3, it goes in for a new drug application review from the FDA. And once the FDA gives them the go, it can go into the market. And then it is usually just reviewed for ongoing adverse reactions or surveillance of any other side effects.
Mm-hmm. Kind of drawing more of what's going on currently with current effects. We are obviously going to rush the trials for a vaccine for coronavirus. So could you compare it more to how a typical drug would be produced and what gets cut out when the time is reduced?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I can give a little
Mhm.
bit more detail and answer that along with it. So first, I'd mentioned like the preclinical phase, and then after that, it goes into phase one. So phase one looks at just testing, is this drug, vaccine, whatever they're testing, is this safe? Is this safe to give to people? So they usually give it to healthy subjects ranging in a smaller population size of 20 to 80 people, and that takes place over 6 to 12 months. So if this is accelerated process, that duration is probably cut in half. And just always think phase one, like safety first. You don't want to give a patient a drug, even if it treats their condition, if it's going to cause more harm from the side effects. So then after they find out that a drug is safe, it will go to phase two. And that's where they test for the effectiveness, if it's going to treat a certain disease or condition. And this then will be tested in a larger population size of 100 to 300 subjects, and that ranges from 6 months to several years. So they're, I think, condensing these phases down for the vaccine. And once they have more data in animals and PK data, which is like pharmacokinetics, they can apply that to accelerate the process. And then phase three goes into the more extensive studies, where I think some of the vaccines for COVID-19 are at right now in phase three. And this is just gathering more information on the safety and effectiveness in different populations. So special populations like children, elderly people, trying different dosages and methods of dosing, like combining with other drugs as well. And this will start being tested in several hundreds to thousands of people. And a typical trial would last up to 5 years. So then after that, the NDA is submitted and it will go on to phase three or phase four if approved by the FDA. And then this is just kind of ongoing. Some drugs may not show side effects until long-term use. So it's really important that the FDA just continues surveillance of these drugs for any other adverse effects or drug interactions.
All right.
So how does the pharmacist role come into play in clinical trials? So not just for pharmacists, but physicians, PAs, nurses, all other healthcare professionals can have roles in these jobs as well. So you may not know that they're out there. Clinical research is probably the one most of you are familiar with and have think of when you think of industry or drug development. And so that's actually in the lab doing the science, developing the molecule and the drug to be tested. So that's probably the most common route. Investigational drug services is in a hospital setting. So you're working with coordinating and supporting clinical trials of patients that are coming in and getting medications, and you're dispensing those to the patient. So you're kind of overseeing the clinical trials to make sure the patients are getting the correct dose and reporting any side effects they may be having.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is where industry kind of comes into play. So the pharmaceutical industry values the clinical training of PharmDs and their ability to apply those skills to human health. So clinical development is one area that in industry, they are developing the clinical trials for a drug. So it's not necessarily as hands-on, like you're not creating the drug, but you're designing the trial and preparing it. Medical affairs, which is the area that I'm in, is more responsible for ensuring the medical and scientific accuracy of information relating to a company's product. So you're working kind of between regulatory and marketing. So if there's a commercial that goes out for whatever drug, it's our role to review that, make sure it's medically accurate. Whereas regulatory affairs has specialists that are helping make sure that the drug development is compliant with the federal and state regulations. And then ultimately drug safety is just reviewing the adverse effects in clinical trials and then communicating that information back to the research and development to further drug development. So there's a lot of room for professional development and growth development in these areas. And there's plenty of other areas and roles within these functional areas. So I know it is probably a little confusing, but if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them on this as well.
So going a little bit more into specific, would you be allowed to talk more about what you are currently doing and what you're working with?
So for confidentiality purposes, I can't talk specifically to any products, but I am in oncology, so I'm supporting the therapeutic area of oncology. And in medical affairs, I review materials that could potentially be training people that go into the sales force. I can answer questions from consumers or even doctors if doctors have a question about how this drug works, if there's any adverse effects or how to do change something, they can call in and we can answer more of the medical questions that sales reps may not be able to answer. If that gives a little bit more.
Yeah, we understand. So do you guys have any questions concerning anything with the trials or with anything with undergrad or grad? Because now's the time to do the Q&A portion.
I did see one question, sorry, I just pulled them up, about the phases of the clinical trials carried out simultaneously, or is the duration of each one? So it would have to go through each phase, to get approved to the next phase. So or one product, it would have to complete phase 1 before it goes on to phase 2. So they're just shortened and not necessarily simultaneously going through.
So I saw a question asking about the difference between pharmacy and pharmacology. They seem very similar but have different education paths. So can you shed some light on some differences?
Yeah, so pharmacology is just something you have to learn in pharmacy school, kind of how the drug is metabolized in the body and stuff. So maybe if you're thinking of the PhD route, that's more specific, you study only one area, whereas pharmacy, you're learning about all these drug classes, all the side effects, interactions, how to prescribe them and treat patients, whereas pharmacology is just a small aspect of pharmacy.
It says, if the COVID vaccine is projected to be released in 2021, how do we know it's safe for long-term effects?
Yes, and that is a very good question. So we really don't know about it until time has passed. So it is definitely one concern, but the FDA is one regulating body of any drug, vaccine, medication, whatever that goes out. So they would not approve something that is not safe, obviously, but that's not to say that long-term effects down the road could be different. With it being a vaccine, it's definitely a lot more safer than an actual drug, because drugs can do a lot more to the body than a vaccine. A vaccine's more just boosting your immune response, so you're not going to have potentially as harmful of side effects from the vaccine versus a drug through accelerated process. But great question. That's something definitely a lot of people are considering.
So why become a pharmacist opposed to getting a PhD when working in trials?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and PhDs are still valued a lot in industry. So I think if you are wanting to go more into the research side, working in a lab, then PhD might be the way to go. But if you like more of learning like the patient interaction or the clinical side of things. The clinical experience as a pharmacist is really valued because it's like real life applicable. Like, will this patient take this medication? Or you have to think of other things outside of just the drug that you learn as a pharmacist versus having a PhD.
Mm-hmm. So, in your opinion, would you recommend a person that is trying to gain more experience with how to communicate with people, exposing yourself with a very diverse group through student council to gain more experience volunteering and managing all clubs available on campus? Oh, that's a mouthful.
That was a long question.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to ask is, how do you gain more experience with communication to get more, just get more experience overall?
Sorry, what was that? It cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I think what he was asking is, how do you gain more experience with communication and exposing yourself to get involved with the extracurriculars, I think.
I mean, just so for me, starting like becoming a member of an organization and then just consistently staying involved, like going on to meetings, getting involved in any fundraising activities they have, and then applying for executive board positions. So for me, I was involved in the industry pharmacist organization, and I took on like a position as social media director, and then after that became president. So I think just getting involved with going to all the meetings, asking for opportunities for leadership, giving presentations. That's a great way to get comfortable presenting and building like those communication skills as well.
All right. When you did your interviews, were you interviewed in an MMI, I think is interview format, and how would you suggest going about that format?
Yeah, so I remember, especially preparing for those, it's very intimidating. So MMI is multiple mini interviews, and it's definitely, I think, a popular way for like medical schools to start interviewing students because it goes more about seeing how you solve problems and how you think versus just answering a question. So there's no way to like know the right answer. There's no right answer. It's more how do you answer it, and they just want to see how you think. So I mean, I would just prepare by doing mock interviews, like have your friend or your mom or dad or someone like ask you just questions. I'm sure if you Google online, multiple mini interviews, like sample questions, just practice doing that and like talk out loud to yourself doing it, but more having like mock interviews. Just I always do that even for my interviews for my fellowship. I looked up like sample questions and went through them. So mock interview would definitely be the best for that.
So just to wrap it all up, what would you say, as a final word of advice, what would you say to a student who might be considering pharmacy?
Yeah, I would say just honestly self-reflecting, figuring out like what you really want, what are your career goals, what do you feel like is the best fit for you, because pharmacy school is very hard and time consuming. So if you don't feel like you're doing it for the right reason, then it's not really worth the time and money that you put into it. But I think overall it's just enjoy it because it goes by super quick. Like you have to love to learn. So just taking every opportunity that you get to learn, be involved, stay active, but don't be too hard on yourself at the end of the day. Like you're gonna fail tests. You're not gonna do well on everything. So just give yourself grace on that and you'll overcome it like after you have many experiences.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful insight for all these students. I think we had over 300 students at one point, and I'm sure it helped them a lot. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us. And for all of you guys watching, there is a guideline posted on our Instagram page on how you guys can include this on your resumes and applications. So if you guys were asking that for shadow purposes, and make sure you check out our Instagram for future calls, because tomorrow we have one with a dental student. And then next week we'll be speaking with a dermatology PA and a DO as well. And guys, remember to donate if you can, because we are paying for this program out of pocket, and broke college students and all. So if you can give even $1, it would mean a lot to us. Thank you again, Megan. Like, we really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me, and good luck to everyone. And feel free, if you have any questions, you can reach out.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.